Hello everyone. I wanted to do a video just to explore the subject of game components and the sort of sensory stimuli that you get when you're playing a variety of games. I'm not by any means going to talk exclusively about wargaming, but that will come into it, but wanted to kind of expand it into games in general, really, and just see where the discussion takes me. So to begin with, I've got a few examples out of what I'm going to try and talk about. This chess set was a Christmas present from my parents to me as a boy, well over 55 years ago. It's the typical Staunton design of pieces, but I've never been particularly good at chess or anything like that. But to me, half the joy of the game, of this game and many other games, isn't so much the design of the game in terms of its gameplay and the rules and so on. It's as much about the sort of tactile feel of the pieces and the kind of way that just handling game components and so on, it does sort of etch itself into your memory. So I can remember I was with my father when he purchased this. It was a sort of it wasn't a surprise Christmas present. It was a present that I'd asked for. The toy shop Hamleys, famous toy shop in, I think it's in Regent Street in London, used to have a branch in Croydon back in the 1960s, and I can just remember the sort of atmosphere of Christmas shopping in a toy shop, and just the excitement of looking forward to opening this on Christmas Day and beginning to kind of play chess. It was very popular at school, I remember. But as I say, I was never a very good chess player. But it's just the sort of sheer tactile kind of experience of these pieces, of classic style Staunton chess set design. So that's where I'm going to start. It's really with my sort of younger memories, but I want to sort of explore the importance of components and the sensory stimulus of a game over the actual nature of the game itself, whether or not it's a good game. I think a lot of the enjoyment of a game comes out of the comes out of the sort of pleasure you get with handling the actual gaming pieces and so on. I mean, a very sort of simple example of that is dice. I mean, so many games involve dice, and six-sided dice in particular. And some people are kind of oblivious to their sort of properties, as it were. They're just a mechanism by which the game is played. But other people, I mean, I'm not a complete sort of fetishist or whatever you like over over dice, but there is a certain pleasure in just their sounds, the sound of them being rolled. And then of course, in particular with war games, which as I say aren't going to be the main feature of my video, but I think it probably started with the advent of Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games, but war games rapidly picked up on the possibilities of multifaceted dice. So you can get everything from 4-sided dice to 100-sided dice. Just an example here of some 10 and 12 and 8-sided dice. But it's beginning, you can see how manufacturers are beginning to, I mean these aren't specific to any particular game. There are dice manufacturers out there who just trade on manufacturing dice and nothing else, not related to a specific game. But you can see how they're designed to kind of appeal to the eye, almost like sweets in a sweet shop or something like that. There's a sort of infantile, almost sort of attraction to them, which I can't resist. I've got some other dice here, which again probably had as long as that chess set, poker dice. They're very kind of, don't know whether to risk giving them a clean up or something, but they're very faded and worn now with play over the years. But this 50 or so years ago was quite an innovative thing to have 6-sided dice that didn't have the conventional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 on them. Instead they had the top 6 denominations in packs of cards, and you could roll them and play poker with them. So you'd roll them and see what you would handled, and then your opponent would roll them and try and better your hand. You could play something called lie dice, where you rolled them but kept the results secret from your opponent, and then told them, well, no, you didn't keep it secret. Yes, you did. You did keep it secret, but you had to reveal what the hand was, and then the next person had to roll and better that hand. And if they hadn't bettered it, then they had to lie. So, for instance, I just rolled 3 aces, and that would beat 2 kings. So the opponent would have to have said something like 3 aces and 2 kings or something like that, and then you would have to call them out whether they were bluffing or not. And if you were correct, you won the game. If they were correct, you fell out of the game. So you could play it with a number of people. But anyway, that's another kind of tactile, visually stimulating game. In terms of get back to war games, there's a particular game called Saga, which has its own dice, which work in exactly the same way as 6-sided dice. They have a number of different faces. So this is the set that you would need to play the Viking faction. So their design, I think this is really kind of clever design. They're designed to look like runes, Viking runes. So there's one side which is is only on one of the 6 faces. There's another one that's on 3 and another one on 2, and you roll them, and then you have to place them on a battle board and combine them in. Sometimes you have to combine them in certain combinations, but you could play the game with ordinary 6-sided dice, but I just think Saga dice are so wonderfully designed. I mean, in particular the Viking one, because they've been coloured almost like bone colour, so they look almost like something that you might imagine a Viking rolling in a tavern or something like that. A lot of the other Saga dice for different factions don't necessarily work quite as well. I mean, I think probably my least favourite is the Welsh, not because the facings are poor, but it's just the colour. The colour just doesn't quite look right to me. Another one that I don't think is particularly good is the Crusader faction. Again, it just looks a little bit kind of insipid. Red and white should be, you would think, would be an instantly recognisable colour for the Crusaders, the sort of Templar colours, but it's just not quite. The red's not quite deep enough, and the white's not quite pure enough. So it looks a little bit insipid. But other ones, like the Muslim factions, Islamic factions, are just fantastic, sort of black and gold colours. You have the Scots and the Picts with these sort of earthy yellows and browns, the Anglo-Saxons and the Anglo-Danes, sort of green and white, Normans and Bretons with red and yellow, and these are particularly good. These are the ones for the late Romans with the sort of Christian symbols, the Cairo on them. And then Saga as well. I mean, a lot of people criticise the game designers, Studio Tomahawk, for making all these components, and they accuse them of sort of cashing in. I don't think it's a case of that at all. I think these are a joy to own and to play with. But other manufacturers have produced gaming components for the game of Saga. And this is something that Studio Tomahawk, had they wished to really cash in, milk the audience would have done, but they've left it to other people to do. So it's almost a sort of demonstration of the fact that they're not trying to wring money out of people. But you can get measuring sticks to move your figures. I forget the name of this. Something Skulls, an American company. They do really nice movement sticks with designs specific to the faction that you're playing. There's another one here that they've done for the Saracens, which is in kind of clear perspex. I don't know whether you can see that with the... but really kind of intricate, lovely designs on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out a few games and so on, not war games now, just to kind of give you some examples of what I mean and how important these stimuli are to your enjoyment of the game. It doesn't necessarily, as I say, have to be even a good game. If you can create a kind of sensory stimulus to the game, that allows the player to kind of wallow and luxuriate in all these different sensations, then that in itself can go a long way to making a game enjoyable and successful. So this is an old Waddington's game called Campaign, and this particular one dates from the 1970s, but I can remember playing this as a schoolboy with a friend of mine who owned a version of it back in the 60s, and it's a classic example of what I mean. The game itself is really just a glorified version of chess, but the actual kind of atmosphere that the artistic design of this game creates is something really special. It really, to me, it really captures that the sort of scintillation of the Napoleonic era. So it's sort of halfway towards a sort of Napoleonic war game, really, but played on a board with much simpler rules. This is just a bit of background that comes with the game to give you a kind of historic, the feel of the actual history of the period. It's got nothing to do with the rules. It's just a sort of 3-page brief synopsis of the years of Napoleon. And the rules themselves very much kind of made to look like Kriegspiel or something like that. But as I say, very simple rules. But the map is just gorgeous. I think the board, it's just really, really clever for the way it's designed to look like the old sort of black and white lithographs and so on. And then the pieces themselves, you have 3 types of piece. You have the general, which has clearly got a sort of like a Napoleonic profile bicorn hat on top there, but almost similar to those chess pieces earlier, the Staunton chess pieces, very kind of simple and yet effective designs. These are cavalry pieces, and then the infantry pieces have a sort of look like a bit like a shako, with the sort of plume on the front of the shako. And as I say, the pieces move differently depending on what they are, but very simple diagonal or unidirectional movements for them, increased distance for the cavalry. And the idea is simply to capture a number of enemy provincial towns or capitals, and that's how you win the game. But you can, as I say, with games that are well designed artistically, you can just sort of wallow in the sort of fluff of the game almost. It's just a really pleasurable game to play, really enjoyable. So here's a game that might look familiar to you. I've only purchased it recently, last year, and featured it on a previous video, but it's a facsimile of a game that was excavated at and it's called the Royal Game of and again, it's one of those games. It is good to play, but it's more just the visual appeal of it, the design, and the tactile feel of the pieces and so on, and the curious dice. The dice are sort of tetrahedrons that you roll, and you move your pieces depending on the combination of points, corners that you roll. But this is to me is another perfect example of how you can just immerse yourself in that, because of the way the artwork is presented. You can just immerse yourself in the ancient world, and it hardly matters whether it's a good game or not. It's just something that you can indulge yourself in and get lost in. So another example of what I'm trying to describe. Okay, this next game is really the epitome of beauty in a game. It's a set of mahjong tiles. Haven't played mahjong in many years now, but it's just a classic example of what I'm trying to describe. Beautiful, beautiful tiles, used to be made of bone or ivory, backed with bamboo, but nowadays they're nearly always a sort of plastic material. It's rather like a game of cards, only with far more cards. 144 tiles in all. Unlike, it's really a kind of a British adaptation of a game brought back from our empire days, really. But unlike a lot of the games that the British found in India and brought back, it's been elaborated rather than simplified and turned into a child's game. So games that we're all familiar with, like Snakes and Ladders and Ludo and so on, are usually derived from far more sophisticated games that were played in India. In the case of Mahjong, as a game in China, it probably doesn't go back that far. It's not a game from antiquity. Probably dates back to the 17th century at the earliest. But the British kind of took it up and transformed it really into a more elaborate, sort of decorative kind of game. That I learnt Mahjong from a Chinese friend, and she was very dismissive of what she described as tourist Mahjong. For instance, there are basically three suites, but there are also wind tiles, so you have east, west, north and south winds. You have three types of dragon tile, Fat and Po, can't remember what the C is. But then you also have flowers and seasons, and all these type of tiles, a typical Chinese person wouldn't play with them. They play the game far more as a very kind of rapid, certainly gambling game, slapping the tiles down and playing it very speedily and without any of this beautification, really. It's really the game that's played in Britain is really a product of the 1920s and developed in Britain, rather than growing in China and being brought across. But to me, that is part of its allure. Just that you want to play it on a kind of green baize table in a Art Deco building in a sort of Agatha Christie type setting. These sticks and so on are tally sticks used to keep score. You have counters just to randomly decide on the players' positions on the table. You have joker tiles that you can add into the game that are wild, basically wild cards that you can use for any denomination. I mean, really, the appeal, you can see how the appeal to an English or a Western kind of eyes, the Japanese symbols, the kanji and so on, look attractive in their own right. To Oriental eyes, these are just numbers and words, so they're very, very plain, but they have an appeal to sort of the Western taste. These are bamboo tiles, so this is the bamboo suite, 4 of bamboo. The 1 of bamboo, the 1s and 9s are major tiles, but the 1 of bamboo is usually portrayed as a bird, a rice bird. There's a suite of coins as well, so you have, this is a whole suite. There's 4 of each tile, so there are 4 of 1 of coins, 4 of 2 of coins, and so on. And you play the game, it's basically rather like rummy. You have to get runs and sets of tiles. You build a wall with them at the beginning. I won't get them all out, but basically two of the players, what's described as washing the tiles, where you put them all face down and you do that with them. It's basically shuffling them, and then you build a wall, and then you draw hands, which you keep on, well, you can keep on racks. Again, my Chinese friend would be very dismissive of this. She was very keen on the players holding the tiles, holding their hand, which you do get the knack of in your hand, keeping them all without dropping them. But this is very kind of Western element to the game. When you're washing them, by the way, mahjong in Chinese, it means the game of the sparrows. I don't know if you heard, this is going back to that sensory element to games. You can hear the tiles clicking together, and when you've got lots of them, it's described as the twittering of the sparrows, because it sounds like lots of birds. Not doing it very well there. You need them all out, really. I don't really want to get them all out, I'm sorry. But the British Mahjong Association really was set up in the 1920s, I believe, and it came out of a need to standardise the rules, because there are so many, just as there are so many card games, there are so many versions of the game you can play with tiles of this sort. And the British Mahjong Association really standardised the games so that you could move from one circle of players to another and still be familiar with accepted rules, rather than having to adapt to people's house rules, literally as you went from one house to another, or one circle of friends to another. But the British Mahjong Association has really established a standardised set of rules and procedures for playing the game. And it's also, you can finish the game, you can get Mahjong with various combinations of tiles as well, not just groups of 3 and 4 or runs of or so on, but you can also have a hand, which, if you're lucky enough, for instance, having all the ones, so you've got to get a hand of 14 tiles. So that there are 19 recognised by the British Mahjong Association. So, for instance, you have a hand called the Gates of Heaven, which is this one here, Imperial Jade, where you're trying to collect all the green tiles, green dragons and 2s, 3s, 4s and 6s and 8s of bamboo. That's quite hard to work towards, but you're basically drawing tiles from the wall, discarding the tiles into the centre of the table, and basically trying to complete a hand of Mahjong. But to me, absolutely immersive game, really, and not so much from the playing of it. I mean, I really find I much prefer to kind of almost get into a dreamlike state when I'm playing games, rather than counting discarded tiles and certain possibilities of tiles you want turning up, and being a good player of the game, just as I can't play poker or any card game very well either. It's just that immersive experience, plus all the kind of ritual that goes around the game as well, choosing the order of play and where you sit and the protocol of it. It's got a kind of mystique to it, which I love. So to me, Mahjong is the classic example of a sort of sensuous game, a game that appeals to the senses, to your senses of touch and sight and hearing, not taste, unless you're going to put the tiles in your mouth, which I wouldn't recommend, but all those other things. It's a totally absorbing game, and I just love it, even though I haven't played it for years. Just love it as a game. So I've just been describing Mahjong tiles as effectively playing cards, although they're a lot more decorative to our eyes. Chinese treat them far more prosaically, rather as we do our own traditional decks of playing cards, but there is still a certain amount of sensory experience to be had playing with ordinary cards. You may recognise this particular hand as the traditional dead man's hand. It's supposed to be the hand that Wild Bill Hickok held when he was shot in the back of the head in Deadwood in 1876, I believe. Absolutely no evidence for that being the case, and in fact, even this example of dead man's hand isn't necessarily how it's always been defined in the past. I mean, this particular combination of cards, the two black aces, including the ace of spades, which has always got a sort of slightly sinister connotations to it, and the two black eights with a whole card, which some have even defined as the Jack of Diamonds. This only really came about in the 1920s, and as I say, the dead man's hand has been defined as a number of combinations of full houses of one kind or another, and so on. So where is it that we get this sort of almost superstitious reverence for playing cards and for fate being dealt you? Well, it comes from the derivation of playing cards from tarot cards. I've got quite a large number of tarot cards because, again, I'm not I'm very cynical, unsuperstitious person, but what appeals to me about tarot cards is their artistry and the symbolism and so on. I enjoy symbolism, and I enjoy very decorated artistic designs of things. So even though tarot isn't a game, it is the tarot pack is the precursor of our modern day playing cards. This is a box that I've had, again, like those poker dice. I've had these since school days. So there are, I forget how many, 20 odd, 21 cards, which are the ones that you associate with tarot, the hanging man and justice and death and so on. These are a very traditional design. These come from Switzerland originally. But the main deck of cards is actually what we would recognise as a deck of playing cards. There are 4 suites. So cups, swords, I can only find cups and swords in here. There are others. Batons, so they're clubs, yeah, so that is quite literally the derivation of our clubs. Our clubs nowadays look nothing like a club, but the club did used to be a club or a baton. The cup, I believe, is the precursor of the hearts, because it's a vessel filled with fluid. And the swords are now our spades. And you have coins as well. Yeah, there we go. So very similar to Mahjong in that respect. There's a suite of coins, and the coins signify wealth, I suppose, so that's where we get our diamonds from. So these look a lot more decorative than an ordinary set of playing cards, but you could play cards with these, not with the 21, I forget what they call them now, character kind of cards, as it were. But tarot cards, I love I love sort of, I've got quite a lot of them. I enjoy collecting them simply for the beauty of the artwork that goes into some of them. So I won't show you them all, but this is quite a nice set. Revelations Tarot by Zach Wong. And these cards, there's a lot of bunkum. You usually find them in New Age shops and all this kind of thing, but it suggests that you embellish the box with protective and empowering symbols and cleanse the cards, not by washing them, but by putting them in the right order. Smudge them with sage to cleanse and re-energize the cards, and store them with stones and crystals to absorb negative energy. Well, no, sorry, but look how lovely they are. So you've got similar kind of, I don't know what you call them, major cards or character cards or whatever. But the thing I particularly like about this particular deck is that when they're reversed, which is, you can deal the card upside down and it has a different meaning. But with this particular set, there's a kind of symmetry about the design, so they look correct, other than the fact that the text is upside down. But there's an image no matter which way round you turn the card, and the image is reflective of the meaning of the card. So some of the images look a lot more inauspicious if you have them upside down. So this is the lovers, and there's a nice sort of lovey-dovey scene when it's the right way up, but the other way round it's a lot more red and lustful, I suppose you could describe it. But I think this is really where we get our superstitions about ordinary playing cards from. It's going back to this kind of occult, superstitious sort of use of cards to predict the future and predict one's fate. So if you're dealt a bad hand in terms of symbolism, then it can augur badly for you. So that's an interesting one, death. So you have this sort of, I don't know whether that's the goddess Kali or something, that sort of looks very much like a sort of Indian bringer of death. But if you reverse it, you have sort of birth, new life coming out of death. But again, they have, as well as the 21 major cards, I suppose you call them, they have all the suites. So again, you could play the game of cards with these. Cups, see if I got it right. Pentacles they call them, not coins. Swords, that's the epee, forerunner of the spades, and wands rather than batons. So that's one set. I'll show you one other that I got that I quite like. Particularly fond of this one. It's not printed as quite as well, but this one is the Golden Tarot by Cat Black, and she has kind of used a sort of medieval theme to the cards, which I think is quite a nice touch. So she's taken motifs and designs and styles from lots of different medieval sources, so that it looks like a sort of period set of cards, really. You could almost imagine them being used in a sort of back street of some medieval city, sort of non-Christian practices going on. But the images are all very reminiscent. I mean, this one here, Death, these angels, reminds me, especially with the golden kind of background, to the Wilson diptych, which is dates from the period of Richard II's reign, so the end of the 14th century. But there are some angels with very similar kind of blue coloured dress in that. But I particularly like this one. That almost looks like a Hieronymus Bosch or something like that. And again, you've got the normal suites. See what she describes them as: swords, St George and the Dragon there, wands, so they're the batons or clubs, cups, again they're the forerunner of hearts, and she calls them coins rather than pentacles, so there you go. So, again, a very kind of sensory experience. You could stare at these for ages on end. There's so much so much to see and look at in them. Lots of tiny little details in them. Everyone in its own right is almost a work of art. So that's playing cards. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you, which follows on from all the others in a way, is this game here, which is a French game. I've never played it, and in fact it's really more, it's not exactly a child's game. It can be played by adults, but it's particularly suited for children, really, to allow them to sort of improve their skills in verbalising what they see in images. So it's a game, it's sort of the reverse of everything else that's gone before in this video that I've been talking about. Rather than the game gaining its allure from the artistic designs in the game and the tactile and visual sensations that you experience in the game, this game is actually turning those visual experiences into the game itself. So let me demonstrate. As I say, I've never played it. In fact, in order to do this video, I've only just taken it out of the cellophane wrap. It's just the idea of it just struck a chord with me, and I wanted to own it. But as you can see, it's very much like almost like a kindergarten style of game. It is competitive, but in a very kind of constructive way. So you can be played by up to 6 players, and each player, this is one as grown adults, you might be a little bit embarrassed about playing it, but each player is represented by a little wooden rabbit that you place place on position 0 here, and the idea is to get your rabbit around to position 30, but you're not rolling dice or anything crass like that. What you have to do is, I'll just move that out of the way for a moment. You have a pack of cards, so rather like a suitable follow-on from the tarot cards that I just showed you in the last segment. And on each card there's this rather kind of beautiful designs. All with lots of odd motifs. I mean, it looks like a nursery kind of drawing, but it's a little bit unsettling in a way. A sort of a thermometer with Fahrenheit and centigrade scales on it, with the mercury being some kind of serpentine creature, and the mercury being almost like blood that's spilling out of its mouth, with a curved horizon in the distance, and then the moon, a full moon in the sky. Very sort of childlike character walking across a landscape and blowing bubbles that are turning into little kind of nebulous planets and so on. See what I mean? They're all you can get lost, you can get immersed in the imagery of this game, but the way you play it is that, say you have 6 players, I'll only deal 1 hand. I'll deal 2 hands to show you. So we'll pretend for a moment there's only 2 players. So each player is dealt 6 cards at random. And you have a discard pile there as well that you draw from later in the game. So if I was this player here, I had been dealt these 6 cards, and I might, one of the players is designated the storyteller, so let's say that I've been designated the storyteller for the first round. So I choose one of my 6 cards without the other players seeing. So I'm going to choose this one, and I have to give a sort of verbal or audible clue, description of what's on this card. So looking at it without vocalising anything, to me it's a scale where a feather is outweighing a bag of coins. So it's defying the laws of physics, but it's sort of implying a message about money can sometimes be outweighed by things that appear lighter and less consequential. So my aim is to be able to describe this card in such a way that at least one of the other players is going to be able to identify it. But I don't want all the players to be able to identify it. So if everybody picks this card out later, I will get no points, and if I get no points, I can't move my rabbit. If all the players pick it out, I get no points. If no player picks it out, I get no points. So if I make my description deliberately too vague, then I can't get any points that way. So I have to make it just about accessible to 1 or 2 of the other players. Okay, so I'm going to say a description, say money isn't everything. That's going to be my description. So I keep the rest of my hand, and I to put that one down there for the moment. And then if you put yourself in the place of the other players have to pick a card from their hand which is matches best the description that I have given. Now, I can hardly see anything on any of these. To me, that one there looks like a businessman climbing a set of stairs on his own, so kind of fits the theme of money, isn't everything? So out of all the ones that I've got, I think that's probably the best. So I'm going to pick that as the non-storytelling player, and then there will be at least one other player. So you can play it with a minimum of 3. So let's draw 6 more cards off and show you another hand. Money isn't everything. I can't see. So I may have picked a story, you see, that is too vague. So that one there seems to be a person trapped inside one of these snow glasses, but with the snow's falling on the outside, but she looks trapped by her own possessions. So I'm going to pick that one for that. So what you would then do is you place the cards face down, including the storyteller. All the players hand their cards to the storyteller, and then the storyteller places them down in any order he wants. So here you've got 3 players, so you've got cards 1, 2 and 3. And then each player, apart from the storyteller, who doesn't vote, has voting tokens numbered from 1 to 6, because there could be up to 6 cards laid down. So in this case we only need from 1 to 3. So they will each put their token down against the card, no, they put it down in front of them, and then reveal it once everyone's laid their cards down to say what number they think it is. And the idea is that you've got to pick out the card that you think is the storyteller's. So if the 2 other players both put their cards on these 2 and not that one, the storyteller gets no points. But the person who's picked out the alternative, the other card, will get a point, so they'll be able to move their rabbit 1. And it goes on like that. I think obviously it's a much more playable game with 6 players. But I just love the idea that it forces you, the game sort of compels you to look at the images, to verbalise what you're seeing. So it helps with all kinds of skills of perception and description and articulation. And the images themselves are quite haunting. As I say, I've never actually played it, but some of them, that's quite gruesome in a way. A heart in a jar, a flaming heart in a jar. They're very dreamlike. But anyway, that is the end of my video on sensory elements to games and gaming components and so on. Touch and feel and sight and sound. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you on the next video. Bye for now.